So I just read this article, and there's a bunch of articles in almost every major newspaper across the world that were published today, or maybe it was yesterday. But the story is about a study commissioned by the British government on the link between, or relationship between cannabis and psychosis. And so these British scientists went through all of it's basically a meta-analysis. They didn't do any data collection themselves. They looked at every study that had been done on this relationship between cannabis and psychosis throughout the scientific journals through the past 30 years or whatever, since they've been collecting statistics. And they found that there is a statistical link between cannabis and psychosis. Nobody can really dispute that. The question is, though, how do you interpret this information? The headline of one of the articles that I'm going to include in the description box is basically, it says, smoking one joint can increase your risk of becoming schizophrenic by 40%. So that's what they're taking a correlational study, a result that shows that cannabis and psychosis are correlated, and they're saying that it's a causal relationship, that smoking cannabis causes psychosis. Usually schizophrenia is the specific disorder that they are connecting it to. But see, the thing is, the actual study that they did doesn't say that at all. It says that people that, if we're going to relate a cause to what's going on in this statistical relationship, we could just as easily say that people who are prone to schizophrenia naturally are also prone to smoke marijuana because it is a natural treatment for some of the effects associated with schizophrenia. There are other studies, which I'll also post a link to in the description box, that show that smoking cannabis actually relieves some of the more troubling dissociative and paranoid symptoms of schizophrenia. So, the actual data here can be interpreted in many ways, but of course a government-sanctioned study that from the beginning was out to prove a negative relationship between cannabis, or actually a positive correlation between cannabis and psychosis, meaning if their cannabis use goes up in an individual, the risk of psychosis also goes up. They were set out to look for that from the beginning. And their interpretation of that correlation is also obviously determined from the beginning. They're looking to prove that cannabis causes psychosis, and that's what they're going to find, because statistics are so malleable, you can manipulate them to say whatever you want. And it's easy. I've heard this from a lot of objectivists, a lot of atheists that say all of my spirituality and my mushy thinking and poetic thinking is just a function of the fact that I like to smoke, and it's sort of made my brain into this maybe imaginative tool, but also pretty untruthful and irrational, childish sort of mode. And that's the mode that I'm in because I smoke cannabis. And it's so easy to say that, but I can't disagree that smoking cannabis changes the way you think. It certainly does change the way you think. Looking back, smoking cannabis was probably what first motivated me, or sort of pushed me in the direction of looking at Buddhism and studying consciousness. I never would have even noticed the deeper structures and experiential layers of consciousness that are available if we just start to pay attention to our own perception in a different way than we're used to, than we're taught to. Because as far as psychosis goes, the whole academic way of defining what psychosis is very interesting and quite frightening, I think, because there's a video called The Trap, by a documentary by Adam Curtis that's on Google Video, and he talked about this experiment on, I think in the 60s, by a psychologist. What was his name? I can't remember his name, but basically what he did to prove that the psychiatrists that were running the mental institutions had no idea how to classify or define mental disorders in their patients. He sent 10 perfectly healthy psychology students, graduate students, to mental institutions around the world, or actually, I think it was just around the United States. And he told them to present the psychiatrists at the psych ward with one symptom, that they were hearing a voice that kept saying "bang" inside their heads. And so that was what they told the psychiatrist when they arrived. And besides that, they were just normal. They were told to act normal and, carry out a normal conversation with the psychiatrist, answer his questions, etc., etc. All of them were admitted into the hospital, diagnosed as either schizophrenic, or one of them was manic depressive, according to the psychiatrist. And they were all stuck there, even after they had told their stories to the psychiatrist that, look, we're just doing a study, you can let us out now. He said, no, you're still schizophrenic. They were forced to stay there for months in some cases, forced to take consciousness-altering psychiatric drugs, and basically to get out, they had to play along with the psychiatrist, in the sense that they had to say, yeah, I came in and I was sick, and you treated me, and look, now I'm better. And that's how they got out eventually. And so after this study was published, these psychiatrists were furious, and they said to the original researcher who had orchestrated the whole thing, okay, try it again. Send us more patients, and we'll pick them out every time from now on. And so he said, okay, I'll start sending you people. And then a couple months later, the psychiatrist announced that they had discovered like 50 fake schizoids and psychotic people that they knew that this researcher had sent them. And then the researcher said, actually, I didn't send anybody. So you guys are totally, wacko. You're the crazy ones. So basically, the psychotic, the definitions of what it is to be psychotic that are in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that the psychological academia uses to classify disorders, it's a very vague classification system. And I think if each of us were to go through the manual and search through the symptoms, we would all probably have at least one disorder, or probably multiple disorders that we're not even aware of, because there's no such thing as normal. But anyways, the legality of cannabis is, as much as it is a personal liberty issue, it's a freedom of thought issue, because if cannabis does change the way you think, if it does make you less oriented towards capitalism and self-interest, less motivated to dominate those around you and to control the situations that you're in, if it lends you to be more laid back, more compassionate possibly, more oriented to just go with the flow and not try to trample down on the things that get in your way, but to dance with them and to learn how to gain a relationship with them that's more dynamic and more friendly, rather than to immediately react to everything in a hostile way. And it's easy to say that that's not something that cannabis teaches you, but I don't know about that. I only have myself as an example, and I know that over the last few years, when I did begin to smoke cannabis, a lot about the way I thought about the world changed, and I think personally for the good. And so I'm not just concerned that cannabis is illegal and that governments continue to come out with studies like this that are basically smear campaigns to enforce their view. It's all propaganda to convince the public to be afraid of these plants. And at the same time, every other commercial on the TV that we watch for 5 hours a day on average is for a prescription drug, which in many cases are more dangerous than cannabis. And so the hypocrisy is what concerns me. It's not that cannabis isn't exactly good for you. I wouldn't call it good for you. But donuts aren't good for you either. Alcohol, cigarettes certainly aren't good for you, and they're legal. Cigarettes kill 400,000 people a year, and to this day there is no documented death which was caused by cannabis. You can't overdose on it, and there's some studies that suggest it actually lowers your risk of lung cancer. But I'm not claiming that it's healthy. I'm just claiming that the hypocrisy of the drug war and the destruction that it ends up causing, because it makes drug criminals violent. If it were legal, there's no violence.